Hopefully I made everything clear. All right, now we're going to continue with nets. And of course, we simulated a net last week. And basically you see how easy it is to check into a net. It's really not difficult. And you have fun doing it. Okay, in the early days of radio, nets helped stations meet on the air to share news and messages. Today's nets include support for emergency communications and public service activities. Nets usually have two purposes: pass emergency messages, coordinate reporting and response activities. Okay, net messages are called traffic, which often have built-in routing information to get the message to the right place. Now let's stop right there and go beyond the book a little bit. Okay. There are several types of nets. One is club nets. Is local clubs have their nets on a certain time, certain repeater. Some nets are every night, some are once a week, even some are once a month. They are repeater or group nets. They are also HF nets. Once you get your general license, get on HF. They are HF nets, and they are quite a few HF nets. And nets can be in two categories. Informal is just exactly what it means. Like our simulated net last week was an informal net, okay? Or a formal or directed net. They can be called either or. And that's usually for emergency purposes. And they are a lot stricter with a formal net. And also they are Skywarn net. Okay, Skywarn net is basically the old storm chasers. Ham radios get out, observe, and they're not chasing storms. You do it either mobile or from your house. Say here in Western North Carolina and Asheville, some of the radar from the airport down in Greenville, Spartanburg, their radar cannot see in the valleys up here. So they actually rely on some of us hams to do reporting of what the radar can't see, such as road conditions from snow, ice, flooding, etc., etc., etc. Okay, so that is another form. That is a Skywarn net. Okay, net messages are called traffic, which often have built-in routing information to get the message to the right place. Now they usually those. Later on, we'll discuss that for radiogram form. Okay, Howard. Exchanging messages is called traffic handling. And at the start of some nets, the net control operator will say, are there any message traffic or any traffic to be handled or any relays or announcements? Okay, Howard. Between activations, emergency nets are activated for practice to conduct training exercises. And some of us have participated in this. That's one thing about field day in June. And we discussed field day. It's a exercise to simulate emergency communications using radios. Okay. Net structure and participation. Now remember, nets are strictly voluntary. You do not have to do it if you don't want to. A net control station, NCS, directs the net by calling it to order and directing communications between stations checking into the net, like I done last week. Okay. A station with emergency traffic should break in at any time. In order to do this, if you do have an emergency and a net is going on, simple, say, I have emergency traffic. This is KI4VOW. But what you need to do is wait till they break in communications, okay? Because you don't want to double up and they may not hear you, okay? If you say emergency traffic, immediately the net control should release the net to you for the emergency traffic. Do not transmit unless you are specifically requested to and authorized to do so, and with a request made for the capabilities of information that you can provide, such as sky-warn weather conditions, severe whiteout, or something like that. And I have had to break in. It wasn't a net, but emergency a couple of times. One was a car wreck several years ago during Thanksgiving. Traffic was bad. Car roughly about 5 car lengths down ahead of us. I don't know how, but I was on the inside lane. She swerved this way, went sideways, and rolled about 3 times and went into the median. I immediately got on one of the repeaters, said I have an emergency. I need a base station with a landline. And immediately somebody come back to me. I explained where I was, the mile marker, and been traveling to be aware of the mile marker and where your location is, because you never know when you're going to run into an emergency situation, and they will need to know your location. I told them I was eastbound on Interstate 26 at mile marker such and such, and there'd been a traffic accident here, and we need police, fire, and ambulance immediately. And I have a medical background. I immediately pulled into the median, jumped out, grabbed a handheld that I had with me too, and went running down there to see if I could offer any medical assistance. Luckily, some of the other people that had stopped were nurses, EMTs, et cetera, so I let them have it. About 5 minutes later, you could hear the ambulances coming. 2 girls, they was okay, just scared, and somehow she lost control of the car, but you never know when you will run into an emergency. Okay, exchanging messages on the net. The most important job during emergency and disaster net operation is the ability to accurately relay or pass messages. And the key word is accurately, okay? Say you're helping out for a disaster and you're reporting to, say, the Red Cross that you need 1,000 blankets, okay? And make sure you say 1,000 blankets and not 100 or 5,000 blankets. So, that's just an example, but make sure that has to be very, very accurate, okay? Messages are often formatted as radiograms, and this is a radiogram. This is what it consists of, okay? That is what that is. And it's a preamble or header, contains bits of information about the message so it can be handled and tracked appropriately. And there'll be another slide up for that for header details. Following the preamble is the text of the radiogram. To ensure accuracy, names are spelled out using standard phonetics. Again, this is where the phonetics come into play. Okay, time and date. Well, let me go back up. Number. The number assigned to the station that creates the radiogram. Precedence is the description and nature of the radiogram, handling instructions, station of origin, the one sending it, the check, the number of words and word equivalents in the radiogram, which is down here. Okay, see that? That is where the check would be. Place of origin, the name of town where the radiogram originates. time and date, address, the complete name, street and number, city and state to whom the radiogram is going. Okay. Practice questions. Okay. Drop my paper. What do I do? Oh, here it is. Okay. All right. Questions. What types of signaling uses pairs of audio tones? Now, this is what we covered last week. Okay. And remember, the answer is A, DMF. But remember that this is the keys for the DMF right in here. Okay. And you can actually, on some microphones, turn that off and on. Okay, Howard.
And the key to that, where they talk about pairs of things, the actual name that is dual tone multifunction.
Yep. How can you join a digital repeaters talk group? And I'm glad Zach is here because Zach does a lot of DMR. And Zach, I'm going to have you to give some insight here in just a few minutes on DMR. Okay. Would be C, program your radio with the group's ID or code. What is the purpose of the cutter code used on DMR repeater systems? Okay, is A, must match the repeater color code for access. What function is performed with a transceiver and a digital mode hotspot? Okay, that also would be A, communication using digital voice or data systems via the internet. And folks, I do not do the digital stuff. So, I do voice only. And, hopefully I got all this correct. If not, Zach can stop me and correct me. Okay, what does a DMR code plug contain? Okay, the code plug is access information for repeaters and talk groups. How is a specific group of stations selected on digital voice transceiver? Okay, that would be C, entering the group's ID code. Which of the following must be programmed into a D-Star digital transceiver before transmitting? Now, this is different from DMR a little bit, so this one would be your call sign, A. How is over-the-air access to IRLP modes accomplished? Now, IRLP is Internet Radio Linking Project, which goes through the internet, okay? And that is B, using DTMF signals. And what you did on the IRLP was hit star, then find the repeater that you wanted to get in touch with, and you put in a 4-digit code, numbers, then hit, I believe it was, I hadn't done this while, hit pound, and it would activate it. Okay, but how is over the air nodes accomplished? Again, B, using DTMF signals. Okay. What is voice over internet protocol, VoIP? Okay. That would be D, a method for delivering voice communications over the air, over the internet using digital techniques. What is the Internet Radio Linking Project, which IRLP, which I use, just talked about? And that's A, technique to connect amateur radio systems, such as repeaters via the internet using VoIP. Now remember, like I said last week, when you use this, not all repeaters have this hooked up to their system. So you can only use a repeater that's hooked up to the system, Echo Link, IRLP, et cetera, to another repeater that is also hooked up to the system. Okay, Howard. Which of the following protocols enables an amateur station to transmit through a repeater without using radio to initiate a transmission? and that is D Echo Link. And remember, you can set up your cell phone to use the Echo Link and use it as a radio. What is required before using the Echo Link system? Okay, you have to register your call sign, which is C, and provide proof of license. They will ask for that. What is a talk group on a DMR repeater? Okay, that is B, a way for groups of users to share a channel in different times without hearing other users on the channel. And DMR is very, very interesting. It is used quite a bit in our area. They do have DMR nets, and we do have several repeaters in our area that does DMR. Zach, wake up. You want to say a few more, anything about DMR while we here?
Well, I'll just mention it's a little bit different than regular, regular FM broadcast or regular FM transmissions. So basically, the audio is all digital. So it's instead of sending your audio across the air, it actually sends a bunch of ones and zeros that correspond to your audio. It's basically using a computer chip to convert your voice to data, send it over the radio, then a different chip to convert it back to voice. And it's got some really cool other capabilities you can do on top of it. Like earlier, Randy mentioned talk groups, which is basically within a DMR repeater, you can have multiple talk groups, which are kind of like multiple channels. So one repeater can have multiple channels on it and everything. But you have to have a special DMR radio to do it. Perfect example of that is, and I was hoping I could pull up one of my other DMR radios here to let you hear what it sounds like through a DMR radio. But if you were to key up with a DMR radio, I've got one sitting over here, and listen on a FM radio, this is what you'd hear. So if you had a DMR radio on that same frequency, you would be able to hear me speaking, whereas on an FM radio, you'd hear nothing but that chattering that you heard there. And maybe hopefully I can find another one of my radios here that's charged up in a little bit. But basically, yeah, that's there's and we mentioned D-Star. There's another one called System Fusion, another one called P25. They're all different technologies, and they all require their own types of radios, but they all kind of pretty much do the same thing, just on different modes and different people to talk to and stuff.
Thanks, Zach. Appreciate it. Thank you very much. Okay, Howard. Which of the following describes DMR? Okay. It'd be a technique for time multiplexing two digital voice signals on a signal 12.5 kilohertz repeater channel. What does the term traffic refer to in net operations? Messages exchanged by net stations. A. Which of the following is standard practice when you participate in a net? That would be C. Unless you are reporting an emergency, transmit only when directed to by the net control station, the net control operator. Okay. Which of the following are typical duties of a net control station? Okay, that would be C. Call the net and ordering direct communications between stations, checking in. What technique is used to ensure that voice messages contain unusual words and are received correctly? Okay, again, that would be C. Spell the words using standard phonetics. Which of the following is a characteristic of good traffic handling? That would be A. Passing messages exactly as received. What information is contained in the preamble of a formal traffic message? That would be E. or a B, I'm sorry. Go back one, Howard. The address of the intended recipient. Okay, thank you, Howard. And what is meant by check in a radiogram header? That would be A, the number of words or word equivalents in the text portion of the message. Now, don't let the radiogram and this really scare you, because a lot of clubs, and we'll get into RACES and ARES and Oxcom here in just a moment, they do practice that. So they don't expect you to know how to do this right off, but they will in their meetings practice that. And that is something that to get good at, you definitely need to practice at. But it does come in handy for sure. Okay, Howard. Communication for public service, ARES and RACES. Okay. The two largest amateur radio emergency response organizations are ARES, which is Amateur Radio Emergency Service, and RACES, Radio Amateur Civil Emergency Service. ARES consist of licensed amateurs who have registered their qualifications and equipment for duty in the public service. And this is sponsored by ARRL. RACES is a special part of the FCC Part 97 amateur service to provide civil defense communications during national emergencies. So between ARES and RACES, rule of thumb is ARES, you can consider it local. Red Cross, Salvation Army, local, and state government. Whereas RACES, again, can be used civil defense, homeland security, government, federal, and some Salvation Army and Red Cross. But basically, ARES is local, RACES is federal. Okay, threats to life and property. Okay, no provision of these rules prevents the use by an amateur station of any means of radio communication at its disposal to provide essential communication needs in connection with immediate safety of human life and immediate protection of property when normal communications are not available. In an emergency, you may use any means possible to address that risk, including operating outside the frequency privileges of your license. In other words, if you've got a tech license and need to get on HF that you need a general license normally for, you're allowed to do that. It's the same situation if you're driving along and see a state trooper, highway patrol off the side of the road, and that state trooper is injured, and you use the trooper's radio to call for help. That is permitted. It's the same in this situation also. Okay, you are bound by FCC rules at all times, even if your radio is in support of a public safety agency. In other words, FCC rules apply regardless. Okay, satellite operations. Okay, the International Space Station. Most astronauts hold an amateur radio license, including the Russians or the Israeli, whoever goes up. Most of them do have their ham license. Any amateur license to use 2.70 centimeter 440 bands can communicate with a space station. And of course, this means you're people with a technician license. To call the space station, sign is NA1SS transmit on 145.990 megahertz and listen on 145.800 megahertz. So 145.990 is the uplink to the station. To listen, 145.800 is the downlink on the station, and we'll get into more on that in just a moment. Amateurs have built more than 50 satellites since 1961. And folks, there are a lot of satellites up there with ham radio equipment on them. The space shuttle used to carry ham radio equipment as a backup. The space station, of course, has ham radio equipment, also can be used as a backup. Okay, amateur satellites are nicknamed Oscar for orbiting satellite carrying amateur radio. So if you hear somebody talking about a satellite being an Oscar, they're carrying ham radio equipment. A technician can communicate through a satellite listening for the uplink signal, okay, on 2 meters and transmitting on a 10-meter downlink frequency, even though a technician is not permitted to transmit on 10 meters. I don't know why they put this in here, but they did. But anyway, most of them up are VHF, UHF. Okay, Howard. Okay, satellite definitions. Apogee, the point of satellite's orbit, is farthest from the Earth. Beacon, a signal from the satellite containing information about that particular satellite. Doppler shift, and you will hear these words bandied about from time to time. An observed change in signal frequency caused by the relativity motion between the satellite and Earth rotation. Elliptical orbit, an orbit with a large difference between apogee and perigee. LEO, and that does not mean law enforcement officer. A satellite in low Earth orbit. Perigee, a point of satellite's orbit that is nearest the Earth. Space station. Now, space station is defined by the FCC as an amateur station located more than 50 kilometers above the Earth's surface. Okay, could be a satellite. If it's got ham radio equipment on it, it's designed space station. Spin fading, signal fading caused by the rotation of the satellite and its antennas. If you remember the old AM, FM, especially at night with the distant stations, how it would come and go. Well, that's the same as spin fading. It's similar to that. Okay, tracking a satellite. A satellite tracking program is used to determine satellite schedule, and you can go on the NASA website and get these and see when a satellite is coming over to try to make communications with it. And there is a national club, AMSAT, which this is what they do. This is a club just for making satellite communications. Tracking program needs certain bits of data about the satellite's orbit called the Kepler elements. And what the Kepler elements are is bits of data about that satellite's orbit. And we'll get into that here in a minute also. The software can provide real-time maps of the satellite's location, trajectories the satellite will follow across the sky. And you can actually see this on the NASA maps that they do put on the internet. And the amount of Doppler shift the signals will experience. And a lot of people like to do this and do make communications, with a satellite bounce versus like a moon bounce. Okay, Howard? Operating via satellites. Most satellites only have one operational mode, specified as 2 letters separated by a slash. Okay, the uplink for a satellite in the UV mode is the uplink will be in the 70 centimeter or UHF band, and the downlink in the VHF band, 2 meters. Satellites can use any amateur mode. Most common are single sideband, FM, Morse code, CW, and data. You can tell when the satellite is within range by listening for the beacon. This is where the beacon comes in handy when you want to do that. Transmitted via CW or RIDI. And RIDI remembers radio telegraph. This telemetry data from the satellite contains information on the health and status of the satellite. Now, the telemetry data is always the downlink, never the uplink, always the downlink. Okay? Anyone can receive satellite telemetry. That means you don't have to have a ham license to receive this telemetry. Now, use the minimum amount of transmitter power. In other words, if you can hit a satellite with 5 watts, it's the same as a repeater. If you can hit it with 5 watts, use 5 watts. To contact satellites, since their relay transmitter power is limited by their solar panels and batteries. Your signal on the satellite downlink should be about the same strength of that as the satellite's beacon. Okay, time for more practice questions. What is the Radio Amateur Civil Emergency Service, RACES? Okay. Radio service using amateur frequencies for emergency management or civil defense. A radio service using amateur stations for emergency management. And basically it's D, all the above. I won't go into all that. What is RACES? Okay. That again, that is D, FCC Part 97, Amateur Radio Service for Civil Defense Communications during national emergencies. And I might want to add, there is another type of support out there, which is called OXCOM. OXCOM is basically taking the place of most ARES and RACES, and what you have to get into OXCOM, there's several FEMA courses that you have to take and pass to get into OXCOM, and that's what we have here in North Carolina is basically OXCOM now. Okay, Howard.
I don't think you'd read this one, have you?
Okay. See what? Oh no, I haven't. I'm sorry. What is the Amateur Radio Emergency Services? ARES. Okay. ARES is a group of licensed amateurs who are voluntarily registered. Their qualifications is an equipment for communication in the public service. When do FCC rules not apply to the operation of an amateur station? D, they always apply. Okay, Howard? Are amateur control operators ever permitted to operate outside the frequency privileges of their class? And that is D, yes, but only in situations involving the immediate safety of human life or protection of property. Which amateurs may contact the International Space Station on VHF bands? That would be B, any amateur holding a technician class or higher license. Who may be the control operator of a station communicating through an amateur satellite or space station? And that is D, any amateur allowed to transmit on the uplink frequency. What is the FCC Part 97 definition of a space station? And again, C, an amateur station located more than 50 kilometers above the Earth's surface. What is a satellite beacon? Okay, that would be D, a transmission from a satellite that contains status information. What is Doppler shift in reference to satellite communications? That is C, an observed change in signal frequency caused by the relative motion between the satellite and the Earth station. What causes spin fading of a satellite signal? And that is the rotation of the satellite and it's the satellite's antennas. So that would be B. What is a LEO satellite? D, low Earth orbit. Which of the following are provided by satellite tracking programs? Okay, it would be D. All these choices are correct. Which of the following are inputs to a satellite tracking program? Again, that would be D. All of them.
I beg your pardon?
What? I'm sorry?
It's B, the Keplerian elements.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, Keplerian elements. I'm sorry. You're right. I was looking at the wrong one.
Mhm.
What telemetry information is typically transmitted by satellite beacons? And that is C, the health and status of the satellite. What is the impact of using effective radiated power on a satellite uplink? And that would be C, overloading the satellite batteries.
Again, B, blocking the other users.
It's not overloading the batteries?
No, the one with the most power captures the satellite.
Okay,
And so, if you're running a lot of power, and a lot of satellites have a band of frequencies so several people can be on there at the same time.
oh, okay,
One running in too much power will overdo it.
okay. Well, like I say, folks, that shows you I don't do satellite. Okay, what is the mode of transmission commonly used by amateur radio satellites? Sideband, FM, CW data, and that is D. All these choices are correct. What is meant by the statement that a satellite is operating in UV mode? And that would be B. Uplink is in the 70 centimeter band, and the downlink is in the 2 meter band. Who may receive telemetry from a space station? Again, that's A. Anyone. Which of the following is a way to determine whether your satellite uplink power is neither too low nor too high? And that would be D. All these are correct.
Again, C, your signal strength on the downlink should be about the same.
Oh, okay. Not D, C. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Howard. Like I say, I don't do this, so
And
that's the end. But there's a few things I want to go over.
okay,
Okay. Can you make my image a little bit bigger?
I sure can.
Okay. This isn't in the book, but I want to go over it. Number one is, and I get this question asked, logging all the contacts. Okay. You do not have to log your contacts. That is not required anymore. But with UHF and VHF, I do not log contacts because if you did, you fill up a notebook real quick. However, on HF bands, I do log on my contacts. Okay. And there's two ways you can do it. You can do it here on the computer, and there are several sites that has that, like Logbook of the World and a couple of more. But I also log mine in a notebook. Okay. Hope everybody can see that. Date, time, band, what country they're called, etc., and signal report. The reason I do it on a piece of paper is just in case my computer logging contact goes into internet universe somewhere and things have happened, I have a backup. So that's why I double it up and do it that way. So just in case it gets lost or whatever, I do have a backup. Okay. QSL cards. You'll hear about QSL cards. Okay. This is a QSL card. This one's from Arkansas. Hams, when they make contacts, sometimes swap QSL cards. That's what that looks like. This is one from Arkansas, and it's a postcard basically, contact information, a little note on the back. UHF, VHF, no, HF, yeah, and it's not mandatory. You don't have to do it, but we still do that. And this one is a QSL card from Germany. And we all got them from all over, folks. That's just a couple of them. Okay. Also, we mentioned using mobile radios and plugging it up to your cigarette lighter. Okay. This is a plug for that. Okay. That's what that is. You can get these off Amazon. This is a 12 amp plug. I do not recommend using your cigarette lighter to run a 50 watt radio. Usually it takes about 8 to 9 amps to run a 50 watt radio, and your cigarette lighter is 6 or 7 amps. But what I do use in my truck is one of these in the computer port. If your vehicle has a computer port, that is fine. They're 12 amps, so they can run a radio, or if you don't want to do it using it this way, you can hook it directly up to the battery, which I recommend over using one of these plugs. Okay. Antennas in trees. And we spoke about this in the past. Buildings, trees, especially during the summertime, will block VHF, UHF signals. So when you put up an antenna, base antenna, try to keep it as far away from the trees as possible. And when you put an antenna on a vehicle, I prefer mag mounts because you can move it, and you don't have to drill a hole in your vehicle to do it that way. Some prefer the other mounts. I like the mag mounts. Okay, websites. This is 3 websites you need to write down for information. One is eham.net. Okay. Hope everybody can read that. Okay. This website gives product reviews. And after you get your license, it's a free website. After you get your license, you can join. I think you can join before you get your license, but they do ask for license. Before you buy any ham radio equipment, go to eham.net, and on the page it will say product reviews. Click on that, and then that'll take you to A through Z, all types of ham radio equipment, antennas, coax, power supplies, radios, et cetera, into subcategories. Before you buy any piece of equipment, I always check with the reviews on the eham.net and see what other hams are saying about this equipment. The reviews are 1 through 5, 5 being the best. Personally, anything 3.7 or lower, I have a tendency not to buy it. But that is your decision. Some guys, anything 3.5 or below. But read the comments on that piece of equipment, what the hams say about it. It will help you in the long run, especially saving money. The other one is QRZ.com. And basically for that is you can look up hams up in the top left-hand corner, search function, put in their call sign or their name, and it gives you information about that particular ham. You get some information if you're not a member, but that's about it. It's very limited. But if you're a member, again, this is free. It'll give you a lot more information. Okay. And also on both these sites, they do have used equipment for sale. Now, one word of caution about that. Ham radios, like anything else, you got your good and you got your bad. Okay. Roughly, I'd say 95, 96% of the hams out there are good people. It's that 3, 4% that makes the rest of us look bad. And there are hams out there that will cheat you in a heartbeat. So, word of caution. I'm not saying I have bought used equipment, no problem. Just be careful. And the other website is arrl.org. That's the national organization. Okay. Now, 2 things I do encourage new hams to do: get involved in their local club and join ARRL. That's our mouthpiece to the government, you might say. Okay. Also, people's asked me, and I'm not making fun of people, I'm not. When they find out I'm a ham radio operator and I talk to other countries, I've had several people, can you speak that many languages? How many languages do you speak? I said, 1, English. English is the universal language of ham radio. Okay. You will run into them with heavy accents and a little hard to understand. And I know I'm a little hard to understand to them people for my Southern accent. But English is a universal language. Now, that being said, say I can speak Spanish. I don't, but say I did. If I make a contact with a country that does speak Spanish, such as Spain, South America, I can carry on a conversation in Spanish. You can do that. That is legal to do, but you have to make the contact in English and sign out in English. But if you want to speak in the language, you can. And I've heard guys up around Massachusetts, Boston, Italian, New York, making contact with Italians in Italy and speaking Italian. I've heard them speak French and other communications, German. That is legal. Again, you have to sign out, make contact and sign out in English. Okay.
Can I share a quick story, Randy?
Yeah, go ahead, Zach.
So, just real kind of comical story here. So, when I was in middle school, high school, and college, I took Spanish, and I'm nowhere near fluent, but I knew enough to where, I could have a very basic conversation. And there was one night I was at an event. It was Winter Field Day one year. I'm sure y'all have already learned about Field Day, but basically, there was a guy on there speaking Spanish, and I started talking about how I knew a little bit of Spanish. I said, if you drop me off in a Spanish-speaking country, I probably could get something to eat and buy a plane ticket home. You know, is about the extent of it. Well, they said, okay, well, you go ahead and make contact with him. So I come back to him in Spanish. He comes back at 90 miles a minute. I didn't understand a word of what he said, and I was like, no sé. And then I just said 73 and threw up my call sign and signed off. And the guys that I was there with were just laughing and rolling in the floor. And they said, if we dropped you off in a Spanish-speaking country, you just die.
Yep. So anyway, but yep, that is allowed. Okay. Programming radios. Okay. Speaking of radios, your Baofeng. Okay. There's two ways of doing it. Chirps is a download that's free. You have to have a cable, but you can do it, program a radio with this or manual. I do recommend you learning how to program your radios manually because of one reason. Say you're out doing a special event, okay? And they say, well, we're going to use this repeater instead of this repeater. It's got a PL tone, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, okay? You don't have that pre-programmed in this radio. You don't have your computer with you. How are you going to program it, okay? So I do encourage you to learn how to manually program a radio. Okay. Now, speaking of radios, depending on the area, it's what, especially base or mobile radios. Okay. This is a Chinese QYT 25-watt radio. Actually, this radio is tri-band. It's a 2 meter, 440, and 220 band radio. 25-watt output, decent radio, but I use it basically for special events. But I don't use it permanently around here because of our mountains and stuff. And sometimes you need at least 50 watts to get into a repeater in some of these valleys. Now, if you live in a flatter area with not much obstruction, yeah, that radio would work fine for you. Now, as far as a mobile radio or base station size, you know, this is a 55-watt mobile radio. See, it's not that big. And this is a 2 meter radio. Unfortunately, Yaesu doesn't make these anymore. But this is a very good radio. But this is about the size they are. They're not that big. And anyway, that's about it. Oh, one more thing, guys. Most of you got Howard and myself's email address. If you need the ones that doesn't live in our area, if you need any help finding a club in your area that does testing, let us know. We'll be more than happy to help you out doing that. So, but you'll need to find a local club that does do tests. But if you can't find one or have difficulty, let us know. We'll be more than happy to help. That's it for me. Thank you very much.
You want to do one more, Nick?
I don't know what I thought. Are there any questions? Okay. Well, I've got one more minute. I'm going to tell a story that I normally do. I haven't done it this time, but this is a story about Zach, and Zach knows what I'm going to tell. Okay. Zach was a new ham. Zach was high school, wasn't you, Zach?
I was either about to graduate or just had graduated high school.
Yeah. And Zach was a new ham, just got his license, was doing a special event. It's called the Pisgah Trail Run here locally. And Zach was with a fellow ham who unfortunately became a silent key, and he is missed, Roger Grindstaff. Zach was nervous. Zach was excited. Net Control was our club president, and Scott could be grumpy sometimes. Let's just put it that way. And Zach was a little nervous. And Zach was holding his radio like this or like this or like this, talking a mile a minute. Zach was a little hard to understand. Scott was getting a little aggravated at him. So I said, nah, we gonna fix this. And Scott wouldn't correct him. So I got on there, and I was at one of my stations. I said, this is station 15, permission to call. I forgot where you was at, Zach, station 5. Scott come back, said, permission granted, call your station. So I called Zach. I said, Zach, son, you need to calm down. Take the radio away from your mouth a little further and slow your speech down. You're talking too fast. You're excited. I understand. You're nervous. I understand. I was the same way. First time I got on the radio, I'm scared absolutely to death. And I can sympathize with you. Calm down, slow your speech down, and hold the mic away from you a little bit. You'll do fine. So after that, we didn't have any issues, did we, Zach? So, I corrected him without really embarrassing him or yelling at him or anything like that. And that's, y'all stay in the hobby, you will be put in that position eventually to help somebody. And I do encourage you to help other hams. I never knew or had any thought I would be in the position I am today. But I take my responsibility. I don't take it lightly. I take it seriously. And I do help other hams and enjoy that. So, okay, Howard, that's about it for me.
All right.
Thank you.
And next up, we're going to move right on to lesson 7. And your instructor with that for tonight, Speak the Devil, is Zach. So you take it, Zach, and I'll have your slides up when you're ready.
Thanks, Howard. You care if I go ahead and do it? I've already got them pulled up on this end. You care if I go ahead and share my screen, or?
I'll have to make you host for you to share your screen. So give me a second, and I will be happy to do that.
Yeah, you may be able to hit security and check the little box that says allow screen sharing.
It'd be easier just to make you host. I believe you're host.
Yep, give me just a second here. All right, can everybody see that?
Yep.
All right, so good evening, everybody. I pretty well gave my introduction the first night, but I'm Zach, KM4BLG, over here in Inca. And tonight I'll be teaching you all about lesson 7. So let's just get right into it. So tonight we'll be talking about licensing terms, bans and privileges, international rules, and call signs. So let's talk about licensing terms. So the Federal Communications Commission, otherwise known as the FCC, makes and enforces the rules for the amateur radio service in the United States. They're kind of like the governing body over everything. The full list of those rules is in what's called Part 97 of the FCC rules, which is just the number for that document that's got the rules. And you can view those online. There's a link there in the slide on the ARRL website where you can go and read the full set there. Amateur radio is non-commercial. Basically, hams can't be paid for their services, with a very few exceptions. Completely voluntary. It's meant to be a hobby. It's not meant to be a job. And hams use various events to train and operate radio equipment in useful ways and to keep their emergency skills sharp, such as competitive operating events, chasing awards, and station building. A lot of hams like to challenge themselves. They either want to challenge themselves to build something new or exciting. A lot of them want to challenge themselves to see how far they can make contact. Some of them like to challenge themselves in how many contacts they can make over a certain given time. They want to challenge themselves on setting up portable and operating. That's the fun of it. It's a lot of hams like the thrill of a challenge and overcoming obstacles and all that kind of thing. So let's talk about the types and classes of license. And first off, an amateur radio license consists of two parts, an operator license and a station license. The operator license gives you permission to operate an amateur station, and that could be any station for which your privileges allow, assuming you've got permission to use the equipment. The station license authorizes you to have your own amateur station. Each person can have only one such license, and that covers both of them in your personal equipment case. There are three classes of amateur radio license being granted today in the United States. Technician, which is what y'all are studying for here, general, and amateur extra. Each one of them carries a different set of frequency and operating privileges. Clubs can also be license holders. If you've got a club with at least 4 members, you can get what's called a club call sign. And what that does is it's a call sign that members of the club, as long as they've got their ham license, their operator license, they can operate using the club call sign for different club activities. Maybe it's for a net, maybe it's for like a special event, maybe it's for field day, or maybe it's for a contest. But if the club is doing some organized event, they can all use that club call sign, but each person operating has to have an operator license of their own as well. So this is what a ham radio license looks like, the paper copy. Used to, they mailed these out. Nowadays, you have to log in through the FCC website and print it off yourself. But basically, they've got two sections here. The first off, this top bigger section here is the main license. You can print this off. You can frame it, put it on the wall. Something you keep in your ham shack. And then down here is kind of like a wallet card that you can print off and fold and put in your wallet just to carry with you in case you're out and about doing amateur radio stuff. From your vehicle or from a park or somewhere away from your house. Let's talk about examinations. We're studying for a test here. Let's look at what that entails. So amateur volunteers run their own exam sessions. Used to, you had to go all the way to an FCC office to take an exam. Nowadays, ham radio operators volunteer to give the exam to other people wanting to be ham radio operators. And basically, there's two roles in this. One is a volunteer examiner coordinator, or VEC. This is an organization or a group that actually puts on the tests. Wcars VEC is the one that probably has been mentioned a couple times already. That is the group of examiner teams that does tests in this area and even outside of this area to an extent. In fact, kind of just a random fun fact here, Wcars VEC was the first ever VEC team in the entire United States. They were one of the very first ones that piloted the volunteer examiner program. And then the other role is a volunteer examiner, or VE. This is a ham who's volunteered to help give the test. You have to be general class or higher to help out with this. Technicians can assist. I mean, they can't really sign off on it. They can't, grade the test, but they could help hand out papers or take the money at the door or, hand out pencils, whatever the case may be, they can kind of help on a little bit of the administrative side of it just to, be another person helping with that kind of stuff, showing people where to go, everything like that. Exams are referred to by elements. So element 2 is the technician exam. It's 35 questions. You got to get 26 right to pass. Element 3 is the general. It's also 35 questions, 26 required to pass. And then you've got element 4, which is the extra class, and it's 50 questions, 37 required to pass. So it's much harder questions too, I'll say. basically to get the higher levels, to get your general, to get your extra, you have to pass all of the elements below it. So if you want to get your general, you have to pass both the technician and the general. If you want to get your extra, you have to pass all three: technician, general, and extra. Test forms are filed with the FCC by the VEC administering the exam. So after you take your test, all the documents and stuff that go with that, the VEs will give that to the VEC, and they'll file it with the FCC directly. Once your information shows up in the FCC ULS database, you're fully authorized to operate. So this is an online database where you can go look up by name, by call sign, FRN number, a couple other things, I think maybe address, and see what your call sign is and if it's active and when your license expires and all that kind of stuff. So term of license and renewal, we mentioned about expiring. So amateur licenses are good for 10 years, and they are renewable without re-examination. So assuming you renew your license on time, you don't have to retake the test. This could be the last time you take the test if and everything, unless you want to go to a higher level license. But as long as you keep it up to date, you don't have to retest. If it does expire, you have to stop transmitting, the day it expires, because your license is no longer valid. Kind of like how if your driver's license expires, you're not supposed to drive with an expired driver's license. You have a 2-year grace period to apply for a new license. So if let's say you accidentally let it expire, it slips your mind or whatever, you've got 2 years to renew that, and then you'll be fully reinstated. You don't have to retest or anything like that. But if it's after that 2 years, then you'd have to basically start over from square one, retest, get a new call sign, all that kind of stuff. And now this doesn't mean you have another 2 years to operate after your license expires. This just means you have 2 years to get it legal again before you have to start over. So to find an exam location, there's a website the ARRL has where you can find a license exam. You can probably Google it as well, and you'll find some listings and stuff. And like Randy was talking earlier, him and Howard can kind of help you if you're looking for one of those. So here, there's a few things you'll need to bring to the exam. One is 2 forms of identification, one of them being a photo ID. Your FCC registration number, or FRN. You have to register at the FCC website for that, and they'll ask for a few pieces of information, name, address, stuff such as that, to verify who you are. And then once they have that, they'll give you a long number that's your FRN, your FCC registration number. And any licenses of any kind you get, not just ham radio, through the FCC, will be tied back to that FRN. It basically takes the place of your social security number when it comes to dealing with matters of your FCC license. So once you've tested and everything, it'll take a little time to get it filed in the database. Won't take near as long as it used to. You had to wait, by the mailbox for it to come in the mail. But nowadays, you just go to the ULS website and put in your name, and then look and see if they've issued you a new call sign. And then also too, if you're upgrading, you can go on there and see if they've registered that you've upgraded. So what are some of the responsibilities? With great power comes great responsibility, right? So the FCC requires you to provide and maintain a valid current mailing address and email address in their database at all times. So if you move or something like that, you do need to update that with them in a timely manner. Your license can be suspended or revoked and removed from the database if you don't. You are obligated to make your station available for inspection upon request by an FCC representative. And if they do, you need to have a copy of your original license available. One note I will say about this is generally the FCC doesn't just randomly stop by. Generally, if they're in the area and want to see your equipment, there's probably something not right anyway. You've done something you shouldn't, or your radio is not transmitting properly or something. There's usually something that has led to that. It's not just that they pop in for a random inspection, but you do need to be ready for that if it does happen. So let's talk a little bit about bands and privileges. You've heard a lot of people talk about bands and frequencies and, what can you do and where can you go? So there are hundreds of bands and dozens of types of radio spectrum users, everything from, broadcast stations on the AM, FM radio to TV stations, to cell phone companies, to internet companies, to Wi-Fi, to machinery, to fire department frequencies, to you name it. If you were able to see radio waves, the air would just be a big blob of just all sorts of radio waves at any given time. The frequency privileges granted to the various services are what are called allocations, because you're allocated those frequencies to use. Most commonly, technicians use these three bands. There is more bands they can use and do use, but these are the three most common. One is 6 meters, which is 50 to 54 megahertz, anywhere in there. 2 meters, you can operate anywhere between 144 to 148 megahertz, and 70 centimeters, 420 to 450 megahertz. Most of you will probably start out on 2 meters, or 2 meters and 70 centimeters. But of course, 6 meters is there as well, if you'd like to get into it. And in your textbook, there's a table that shows a little bit more of that. And then, of course, there's another link to a chart that has all the technician privileges that you have access to there. And I believe this is the chart that comes up when you look at that. This is basically, it shows you what frequencies you can operate at here on the left-hand side, and then what kind of modes you can operate on. A couple of these bands, the very, very bottom edge, you can only do CW or Morse code. But generally, that's only 144 to 144.1. So that's not a lot of space you really need to stay away from. And then, of course, here's the 1.25 meter band. And you've got a little section there that's only for point-to-point digital links and everything like that. And you'll kind of get the feel of that as you go along. And then here is the very limited HF privileges that technicians have access to. They have all the privileges that the old novice class that used to be an old class of license had, along with a little bit of 10 meters there. Basically, you have a very small bit of voice and digital up here on 10 meters. And then you've got just a little bit of CW on 80, 40, and 15. Most people, though, wait to get into HF until they're a general class, because you get a lot more than this on a general class license. So let's talk about emission privileges. We were talking about what types of modes you can operate in. So an emission is the formal name for any radio signal from a transmitter. An emission privilege is permission to communicate using a particular mode. Some frequencies you're only allowed to use voice. Some frequencies you're only allowed to use digital. Some frequencies you're only allowed to use Morse code. And that's what those charts are good for. It'll tell you what you can use and where. Some of them you can use just about anything. Just depends on the frequency. And then beacon stations, which I think in another section is covered a little bit more, is they're typically found on 10 meters between 28.2 and 28.3 megahertz, and the lower segments of the VHF, UHF, and microwave bands. Basically, what a beacon is, it's a station that sits there and transmits on some sort of interval, at a regular interval. They're fully automatic, and they just transmit their call sign and maybe a little bit of information about their location and stuff like that, just over and over and over again. And the purpose of them is to study how well radio signals carry. You can use it to gauge, oh, I'm really hearing the beacon very strongly today, or I'm not hearing it at all today. And it's really used for just studying and seeing, how the radio waves travel based on all the conditions.
Zach,
Yeah, go ahead.
how do you know if you're hearing a beacon? How do you know which beacon it is? Are they published on certain frequencies? And so when you're hearing it at this frequency, you know that it's such and such a beacon, or how does one know?
Yeah, so there's a few different types of beacons. There's some of them that are digital and everything like that. Most of them are going to operate in Morse code, that you see that are studying propagation and stuff. And those, they'll give their call sign, and there's actually a list online. They'll tell you the call sign of where where that one's located at and everything like that. So, and then another thing some beacons do as well is they'll transmit at different power levels at different times to gauge, how it does at 100 watts versus 1 watt versus everything like that. But yeah, it basically, you can match it up by call sign and go and look that call sign up and see where it's at.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And like I said, some of them transmit out, I think in an earlier class, y'all talked briefly about what's called a grid square, that basically helps you plot on the world map where you're at. Some of them actually transmit their grid square as well, so you can kind of look that up and see where they're at from that. So, so yeah, let's talk about power limits. So output power from a transmitter amplifier is typically defined in terms of what they call peak envelope power, or PEP. Basically, this is the highest your power gets over your whole transmission. Not as big of a thing at FM as it would be at, say, single sideband, but basically some signal modes, as you're talking or transmitting and stuff, your power level's just kind of fluctuating up and down. And essentially the PEP is where it's at the top. That's the highest it'll get to through the whole transmission. So like, say, a 100-watt radio on single sideband, your signal may be doing this, but it's saying that it'll get up to 100 watts at its very tip-top peak. It'll just barely bump up against it. Like I said, not all modes are that way. Some of them, they stay pretty much consistent the entire time. But basically, that's the maximum power that's going to put out through your transmission. So amateurs are allowed the full legal limit of 1,500 watts PEP output. There are some exceptions. There's a couple of bands where they've got, some limits on there as far as how much power you can do, but most hams have access to the full legal limit there. Below 30 megahertz, novice and technician licensees. This is that section of HF that you had a few limited spaces. You do have to use less than 200 watts if you're a technician. But that gets raised to 1,500 as soon as you get your general. Let's talk too about primary and secondary allocations. So many amateur radio bands are exclusively allocated to hams. You may have, that's the only people you're going to find there. You're not going to have to fight out with somebody else that's using the frequency. One group is generally given, sometimes you get what's called shared allocations, even on the ham bands, where more than one group may have access to those frequencies. Typically, one group is given what's called a primary allocation, which means they're the main ones that have permission to be there. And then the other groups are given what's called secondary allocation, which means that they're allowed to be there as well, but they have to give priority to the primary allocation. So essentially, a good example on the ham bands of this is the 60 meter band, which is on HF. Basically, that frequency band has a primary allocation with the military, and it has a secondary allocation with amateur radio. So basically, us amateur radio operators, we can use it, whenever we want, but if the military needs to use it, or if they're already using it, then we have to clear off and let them use it. They basically got first dibs of the band, but if they're not using it, then we're free to use it. That's kind of the thing there. So the primary service is protected from harmful interference by signals from secondary services. Like I said, if they're there, you have to yield to them. For another example is the 70 centimeter band. Some radio location stations have primary status. So if those are transmitting on those frequencies, you have to, let them be, basically. Part 97.303 lists all the frequency sharing requirements for U.S. hams. Typically on most band charts as well, we saw that colored chart that had all the different allocations. Those will typically also specify if hams have primary or secondary there. as well. So let's talk about repeater coordination, which also includes auxiliary stations. Hams have developed a system of regional frequency coordination to ensure that repeaters use amateur bands wisely and to avoid interference to the greatest degree possible. These are not FCC controlled. Basically, repeaters' input and output frequency pairs are fixed and have a common offset in each region. A committee of volunteers known as a frequency coordinator recommends transmit and receive frequencies. A frequency coordinator representatives are selected by local or regional amateurs whose stations are eligible to be repeater stations. And uncoordinated repeaters are strongly discouraged because they often cause interference. So to kind of summarize all that, that's kind of a lot to take in at once, is basically when you're putting up a new repeater, not necessarily when you're operating on the radio, but when you're putting up an amateur radio repeater, because repeaters cover such a big, broad area and there's only so much radio spectrum out there, there's typically groups of organizations called frequency coordinators. And what those do is that they look at a lot of different things. They look at maps, they look at the terrain, they look at the characteristics of how radio waves travel. A lot of them have special computer programs that can plot a bunch of this stuff for them. And they basically look at a lot of different elements and figure out what frequency would be the most optimal to keep from interfering from anybody else. You know, you don't want to put two repeaters on the same frequency 10 miles apart because they're just going to be fighting each other all the time. So when you put up a repeater, technically, you know, if you go completely by the book, you don't have to get your frequency coordinated, but it's a really, really good idea. Because, you know, one, it helps keep you from interfering from other people and people from interfering with you. But also, two, if there's ever a problem with two repeaters interfering and one of them has went through coordination, the other one has not, a lot of times the FCC and the hams in the community and pretty much everybody's going to side with the one who did their homework and got a repeater coordinator to do that. And there's different organizations around the country. Around here, we have what's called SERA, or the Southeastern Repeater Association. Basically, they're got their territory is kind of pretty much the Southeast, and you pretty much give them, okay, I want to put a repeater on this mountain, you know, and you tell them all sorts of stuff like, you know, how high up you want it to be, the antenna is going to be, and what type of antenna, and what band you want to work it on, and how much power you're going to be running, and they'll sit there and figure out the best frequency for that. And then let that know, and then that way they can take that into consideration. If somebody else came behind you and wanted a repeater, then they already know that yours is there, and they can kind of work around it. So let's do some practice questions. So first one up is, which agency regulates and enforces the rules for the amateur radio service in the United States? Any guesses?
FCC.
Yep, C, the FCC, Federal Communications Commission. Which of the following is part of the basis and purpose of the amateur radio service? Anybody?
I'd say C.
Yep, you are correct. So the goal is to advance the radio art. One thing I'm sure that, you know, somebody's mentioned along the way is a lot of the really innovative radio technologies we have outside of ham radio were designed by hams as part of their just personal experimentations. You know, Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, you know, those were invented by hams that just started playing around with stuff and found a viable product that they could, you know, sell commercially, you know, and not on the ham bands, of course, but, you know, outside of that. Another good example, if anybody's familiar with networking, there's most of the internet runs on a protocol called TCP, and the TCP/IP, which is a connection-based protocol that, you know, computers and servers make connection with. That protocol was originally designed for use on ham radio, and years ago, whenever the internet was still in the early days, some people took that technology and applied it onto a commercial pathway, and the underlying technology was reused for that, and that's what runs probably a good 98% of the internet now, which is pretty interesting. So next question, how many operator/primary station license grants may be held by one person? Anybody?
Uno.
Yep. A good way to think of this question is how many licenses can you have? Well, you can only have one ham license, just like you can only have one driver's license. So, yeah, pretty simple there. Answer is one, A. For which license classes are new licenses currently available from the FCC? Anyone?
D.
D.
Yep, it's D. So, pretty well all of those license classes, there are still people in the United States with those licenses. Because if you had one of those, when they got rid of those, you were grandfathered in. So as long as those people, like say if you were an advanced class, as long as those people continue to keep their license renewed every time, they'll stay an advanced class pretty much forever or until they die, But there's no new advanced class licenses around. You have to go straight from general to extra. So you will see people with the old license classes, but they're grandfathered in because they got that before they got rid of those license classes. But the key in this question is which ones are currently available, and that's D: the technician, general, and amateur extra. The big three. So which of the following is a requirement for the issuance of a club station license grant? Anyone?
Must have 4
B.
members.
I think I may have heard it there. B, yeah, that is correct. The club must have at least 4 members. So I mean, all those are good ideas, but the only one that's required is for B. The club must have at least 4 members in order to qualify for that license. What proves that the FCC has issued an operator / primary license grant? Anyone?
C.
Yep, that's correct. C. So, we talked about that database earlier. That's the official record of the FCC. If the FCC doesn't know about it, it doesn't exist. All that other stuff is good documentation to have, but the only way you're going to be legal to operate is if they have record of it. Just like if you hit with your driver's license, the DMV has to have record of your driver's license for it to be valid. Just because you have the card doesn't mean that you're able to drive. So how soon after passing the examination for your first amateur radio license may you transmit on the amateur radio bands? Anyone?
C.
Yep, that is correct. So basically, as soon as your operator station license grant appears in the FCC license database. Once again, when it comes to matters of licensing, that database is the big ticket to knowing whether or not it's the official record, you could say. What is the normal term for an FCC issued amateur radio license?
C.
C.
Yep, 10 years. And that's it's easy to remember because it's a good round number there. All right. What is the grace period for renewal if an amateur radio license expires?
2 years.
Yep, 2 years. A. And like we said before, you can't. Well, actually, that's the next question. I'm gonna save that. If your license is expired and is still within the allowable grace period, may you continue to transmit on the amateur radio bands? Anyone?
No.
No, you may not.
Nope.
No.
Yeah, as soon as that license expires, right at the moment it does, you can't operate anymore until you get that rectified. But you can get your license renewed within that 2 years, and as soon as it is renewed, then you can go back to them. What may happen if the FCC is unable to reach you by email? Anyone?
C.
Nope. B. So revocation of the station license or suspension of the operator license. It's because the FCC is the government, when they respond with official communication, it's one of those things you better respond back. But generally, though, you're probably not going to get a lot of communication from them. But it is good to make sure that you've got an up-to-date email there. Once again, like I said earlier about the station inspections, is if the FCC is out there, wanting to talk to you, chances are there's something else amiss. Which of the following can result in revocation of the station license or suspension of the operator license? Anyone? All right. B, so failure to provide and maintain a correct email address with the FCC. Kind of a rewording of the last question. They just kind of took it and flipped it backwards. But basically, your contact information needs to be up to date with the FCC. That's the big takeaway there. So this one's just one about those allocations. This is just one you'll just have to kind of remember, and with time, you'll just have this, in your head readily available. But which of the following frequency ranges are available for phone operation by technician licensees?
Benson.
Yeah, the answer there is C. 28.3 megahertz to 28.5 megahertz. That's just one you'll just have to remember. But as you operate, this stuff will just be, you'll be saying it in your sleep. Which frequency is in the 6-meter amateur band?
B. 52.
52 to 0.525 megahertz. If you saw earlier, we talked about the 6-meter band is from 50 to 54 megahertz. So that's right there in between the two, in between 50 and 54. So we know that's the one that's in the 6-meter band. All right, which amateur band includes 146.52 megahertz? Anyone?
D. 2.
Yeah, D, 2 meters. So that's, we mentioned earlier, the 2-meter band is from 144 to 148 megahertz. So 146.52 is in that range. So that's the 2-meter band. On which HF bands does a technician class operator have phone privileges? Anyone? Okay. The answer is B, the 10-meter band only. And the key word here to look out for is that which bands does the technician class operator have phone privileges? Answer C could really trip you up because they do have some privileges on 80, 40, 15, and 10, but specifically which ones do they have phone privileges in? That's B. So that's one, if you don't read the question good enough, it could trip you up. But just watch for that key word of phone privileges. How many amateurs, or how may amateurs use the 219 to 220 megahertz segment of 1.25 meter band? Anyone? So the answer there is D, fixed digital message forwarding systems only. So this is another one you'll just kind of have to remember. That band chart we looked at earlier, that was that little yellow block that we saw in there. That specific portion of the 1.25 meter band was earmarked for that mode of operation and that mode only. And that's one thing I would say, that since you're seeing a lot of questions about these allocations, is in addition to knowing these questions, it would be good to kind of study that band chart and just be kind of familiar with it anyway, because you'll need to know it anyhow when you start, doing this, once you have the license and everything. So which of the following VHF, UHF band segments are limited to CW only? Anyone? So the answer there is A, 50.0 to 50.1 megahertz and 144.0 to 144.1 megahertz. So, once again, that's on the band chart. And typically one good way to remember this as well is if a band is going to have CW only portion, most of the time it's going to be at the far bottom side of the band. So, we talked about the 6-meter band starts at 50 megahertz. Well, this goes from 50 to 50.1. We talked about the 2-meter band starts at 144 megahertz. This goes from 140 to 144.1. So most of the time, if you're going to have a CW only portion, it's going to be at that bottom edge there. Is a good way to remember that too. What is the maximum peak envelope power, that PEP we talked about earlier, output for technician class operators in their HF band segments? Anybody? Answer is A, 200 watts. So once you go up to general, you'll have 1500 watts. But as long as you're a technician on those limited sections of HF, you only have 200 watts to work with. So except for some specific restrictions, what is the maximum peak envelope power for technician class operators using frequencies above 30 megahertz? Anyone? So that one's going to be answer is D, 1500 watts. The key word in both of these, I'll go back here. Well, that says HF, but HF is anything below 30 megahertz. This one says above 30 megahertz. So another good example of where you need to read the questions really, really good and make sure, you understand the elements of what it's asking there. Wait, did I skip one? Okay, no. How are U.S. amateurs restricted in segments of bands where the amateur radio service is secondary? Anyone? The answer there is A. U.S. amateurs may find non-amateur stations in those segments and must avoid interfering with them. That's that primary secondary thing we were talking about earlier, just like with the 60-meter band. If you may find military stations there, and if you do, you got to avoid interfering with them. They've got, like I said, they've got first dibs at the band. So which of the following entities recommends transmit and receive channels and other parameters for auxiliary and repeater stations?
B.
Yep. The volunteer frequency coordinator recognized by local amateurs. So this is where that coordination we were talking about earlier, they coordinate the frequencies. They coordinate who's going to be on which one, just like somebody coordinates a dance or whatever it may be to make sure everything all lines up really good. Who selects the frequency coordinator? Anyone?
I'm going to say C.
Yep. So amateur radio operators in a local or regional area whose stations are eligible to be repeater or auxiliary stations. So the FCC doesn't have any specific, coordinators that they name or anything like that. A lot of times this is may even be a group of hams that, have volunteered to have an organization and they just build their reputation within the community and kind of become a trusted source for that kind of thing. There's no official rule as to which coordination agency you have to use, just whoever is recognized by everybody in that area. Let's talk a little bit about international rules. We've talked a lot about, operating here in the United States. Let's talk about operating to and from overseas. So every country has its equivalent agency to the FCC. It's called different things in different countries, obviously. They all kind of speak back to the ITU, or the International Telecommunication Union, which coordinates allocations across international borders. Basically, they kind of act like a go-between and work with the different governmental agencies in the different countries to try to get hams across the world pretty close to the same allocations everywhere. That way, hams can talk to each other. It doesn't do any good if you're trying to talk to Germany and they've got one set of frequencies and we've got a different set of frequencies. We're never going to be able to talk because somebody would have to go outside of their frequencies. That's where the ITU comes in. They kind of help coordinate that to where, there is a lot of overlap so that you can make contact with people overseas. The ITU divides the world into three regions, and the U.S. is in Region 2, except a very small sliver over the Pacific, which is in Region 3. Just good to know, which region you're in there. Unless you're specifically prohibited by the government of either country, any ham can talk to any other ham in any area. International communications must be limited to the purposes of the amateur service or remarks of a personal nature. So basically, this doesn't happen very often at all, but there has been in the past that different countries, most of the time adversaries, that hams either from the U.S. have not been able to talk to them, or they've not been able to talk to hams in the U.S. Typically this happens like during times of war, and stuff like that. This is not something that, happens just because, but this typically when there's some major war or something going on throughout history. When you do make communications with an international country that you're allowed to, simply keep the communications to an amateur service or remarks of a personal nature, which is pretty much the case with any ham radio communication. But basically, don't be a foreign agent on ham radio. I think for most of us, we're probably not foreign agents, but just in case you are, don't use ham radio for it. So the FCC can prohibit contacts between U.S. citizens and those of specific other countries by notifying the ATU of its objections, which is very uncommon. Once again, it's typically only done as a drastic measure during times of war. International operating. So the foreign country must permit amateur operation of some sort. Most countries do, but a few of them don't. This is for if you actually travel to a country, a foreign country, and want to operate from that country, like if you go on vacation or something like that. You have to have permission when you're inside the country's national boundaries and territorial waters, and you're required to operate according to their rules. What most people will do when they travel to another country is they will get a temporary amateur radio license in that country, temporary call sign from that country, and they'll operate under their rules in that country. The process is a little bit different for each country, but a lot of countries, they'll recognize other countries' license exams as being proof that you're competent and can get a license. Like, you don't have to retest when you go over there. The fact you have an amateur radio license somewhere else is good enough in a lot of countries. But that being said, like I said, it is different in every place. There's really good resources on the ARRL's website as to how to go about that, as far as if you wanted to get something temporary. It's kind of one of those things before you go out of the country anywhere you need to do is preparation, no more than getting your passport and packing your bags and, getting any kind of shots if you're going to a country that you need immunizations to go to, stuff like that. It all kind of is right there with all that planning. So you can, if you're out sailing or something, you can operate from a vessel or a craft that is documented or registered in the United States, even if you're in another country's waters. But if you are in their waters, you have to follow both sets of regulations. So let's say you've sailed out to the, outside the coast of Mexico or something like that. Well, you'd have to follow their regulations and the United States regulations both. So you in that case, you would go with whatever was the most restricted and stay within their regulations. Excuse me. So we've talked about call signs, and everybody and all your instructors have given you their call signs. Let's talk about what makes up a call sign. So all amateur radio call signs have what's called a prefix and a suffix. Basically, any call sign is going to have a number, and the prefix are the letters before the number and including the number. The suffix is any letters after the number. And there can be one or two letters before the number, and there can be one, two, or three numbers after the number. So like my call sign's KM4BLG. My prefix is KM4, my suffix is BLG. There's two letters, KM, before the number, The number's 4, and then there's 3 letters after BLG, the number. So technician license holders, or any license holders for that matter, can choose their own vanity call sign from what's called Group C and D. There's certain call signs, specifically the shorter ones, that are reserved for higher license classes, but you can pick out a call sign just like you pick out a license plate for your vehicle, as long as it, is within the limits of the United States' call signs. And basically, this is your table of who can get what kind of call signs. Basically, let's look at technician, Group C or D. You can have either 1 letter on the beginning and 3 letters after the number, or you can have 2 letters before and 3 letters after. So like I'm KM4BLG, I could be K4BLG, or something of that nature as a technician. And then as you see, as you go up to general and to advanced and extra, you can get shorter and shorter call signs. So what determines that number? So the letters are pretty much randomly assigned unless you get the, or sequentially assigned rather, unless you get a vanity call sign. But basically, each area in the United States has a different number. It's usually done on state borders. As you see here, we're in the 4 area, which is fairly large. And you have all these other areas around the country. And when you move, unless you change your call sign explicitly, that number comes with you. So, and you can also get a vanity call sign with a different number. So even though most people around here are going to have a 4 in their call sign, sometimes you'll meet somebody that has a 5 or a 2 or a 6 or, any number, from 0 to 9, other than 4. And it's usually because of one of 2 things. Either 1, they've got a vanity call sign that has a different number in it, or 2, they may have moved down here from, say, New York, and they've got a 2 in their call sign, or something like that, and didn't change it. So that's, you don't always assume somebody's got a 4 in their call, but I'd say probably a good 80 to 85% of the time, it will be a 4 when you're in this area. So let's do a few more practice questions. Yeah, we got a little time. Practice questions. What types of international communications are an FCC licensed amateur station permitted to make? Anyone? All right. The answer there is A. Just like with the rest of amateur radio, it's for personal use, not for commercial use. And so the answer there is A, communications incidental to the purposes of the amateur radio service and remarks of a personal character. So with which countries are FCC licensed amateur radio operators prohibited, keyword prohibited, from exchanging communications? Anyone?
North Korea.
Yeah, the answer there is A. So any country whose administration has notified the International Communications Union, ITU, that it objects to such communications. This is, like I said, very uncommon, but the key thing to remember there is that they've told the ITU, we don't want anybody from this country to communicate with us. From which of the following locations may an FCC licensed amateur station transmit? Anyone? So the answer there is D, from any vessel or craft located in international waters and documented or registered in the United States. So these others pertain to operating from other countries. So like we said, you have to have authorization in that country unless you're in a boat in their waters to operate there. So your license is just for the U.S. and any U.S. vessel unless you go and get an authorization somewhere else. Who may select a desired call sign under the vanity call sign rules? Anyone?
B.
So it's D. So any licensed amateur, anybody can get a vanity call sign. Just which call signs you can get is a little bit limited by license class, but you can apply for one. Which of the following is a valid technician class call sign format? Anyone?
Say all of those.
So the answer there is A. So what these call signs are, so I'll go ahead and explain one thing you hear a lot on the radio as well, is the letters that come before the number. People people say how many letters there are by, and then how many numbers or letters there are afterwards. So like this right here would be a 2x3, which means there's 2 letters before, 3 letters after. This would be a 2x1, which is 2 letters before, 1 letter after. This would be a 1x2, 1 before, 2 after. And so the 1x2s and the 2x1s, those short call signs, if you go back to that table we saw a couple slides ago, those are only reserved for extra class amateur radio operators. And so basically, the big thing to remember here is that technicians can only have 1x3 and 2x3. So they can have either 1 or 2 letters before the number, and they have to have 3 after the number. So they can, like I said, either have a 1x3 or a 2x3. And you'll be assigned out of the gate a 2x3. And I'm not sure what letters we're up to now, but that's what you'll be assigned there. So that pretty well covers the slides. Are there any questions?
Comment.
Yeah, go ahead.
The one country that does not allow you to talk to their citizens is North Korea.
Yep. Yeah, I forgot about that one. Yeah, they pretty much have squelched just about all amateur radio operation over there, period. But otherwise, even if they did have somebody with a radio over there, you couldn't talk to them. And once again, that's kind of an extreme scenario, North Korea kind of being one of our adversaries and all that kind of thing. So
how do you apply for a vanity call sign? Do you do before you get a license, or how do you do it?
So usually you'll go through the VEC, the Volunteer Examiner Coordinator, and they can kind of, get all the information. There may be a way to do it through the FCC website, but I'm not entirely sure about that. But basically, they'll be able to kind of take you through that process and everything. And yeah, usually what you do is you get your randomly assigned call sign, and then you apply for the special one. It's kind of like when you get a special license plate at the DMV after you just bought a new car. You go there and they've got, the pre-stamped, random letters and numbers license plate, and they'll give you one of those to hold you over, and then they'll go ahead and order the new license plate, and you'll get it in the mail in a few weeks, and then you put it on the car. It's kind of like the same idea.
Uh, Zach,
I had my knob.
Had a little bit of jumble there. What was that again?
I had my novice license at one time, and I was just wondering if I could get that same call sign back.
You might be able to. The big things are going to be whether or not somebody else has snatched it up, of course, and everything like that. And one thing that the slides didn't really mention too is let's say you had like a loved one, like your mom, your dad, your son, daughter. If you had some close family member that passed away that had their amateur radio license, after that 2-year period, then you actually have first dibs at getting their old call sign. There's quite a few people that I know that they actually took their dad's old call sign or something like that after they passed away as their vanity call. So yeah, you might be able to get it back. Just depends on if it's available, and that's where that ULS database would work out pretty well. Is you can go on there and type in that call sign and see if anybody has it currently. And depending on how long ago that was, you may even be able to find where you had it and it expired. If that was, before or after they instilled that database. But,
what you ought to do, Zach, is just Google it.
yeah.
Or QRZ.
Yeah. And QRZ, we mentioned that website. They pull from that ULS database on a daily basis. So You can look up call signs there and even overseas call signs. It kind of brings all those together in one central database. So you're going to get accurate information over there too.
And the ARRL has a lookup that goes to the FCC database.
That too. Yeah, because the one on the FCC website, it's a little clunky in the way you have to use it on. I'll just leave it at that.
And
Hey,
Hey,
also,
Zach.
Yeah, go ahead.
I did not hear you talk about the first letter for American call signs being certain letters.
Yeah, so good point. You brought that up. So I'd forgotten about that. Thank you. So basically, here in the United States, and in any country really, depending on what country you're in, is going to determine what your prefix, what your call sign starts with. Here in the United States, we use K as in kilo, N as in November, and W as in whiskey is the three main ones we use. We also have some A call signs. So we have everything AA through AM is what we have. Those are a little less common, but you will sometimes hear somebody, like I know a guy, his call sign is AI4PD. So anything that starts with AA through AM, that starts with N, that starts with W, or that starts with K is a United States call sign. There's also a couple of other within that, like KP4 is a Puerto Rico call sign. And then what is it? KH?
That's Hawaii.
Hawaii, yeah.
KL is Alaska.
Yeah.
Unless you get that KH6 that lives in Pennsylvania.
Oh, yeah. He aggravates me all the time. Every time I'm like, I got Hawaii. Oh, no, I didn't.
Yeah, I found that out too. And when I got him, he was visiting his father in North Carolina.
There's a whole list of the KHs that are all over the Pacific that are U.S. territories.
Yeah. So but for the general part, if it's on a U.S. territory, like I said, those three letters and then the AA through the AM is going to take
Right now, if you take your test probably within the next 6 months, you're going to be a KQ4 something.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's where we're at in the alphabet right now.
And it's just sequential. So like, I'm KM4BLG. Excuse me. The guy that took it after me is KM4BLH.
And he lives in South Carolina because he checks into the Blue Ridge net almost every night.
Right. And I've checked him into the 6600 net, and I've talked to him. I even call him my call sign neighbor. Whenever I call him back, I'll go, hey, my call sign neighbor, KM4BLH. So yeah, if let's say, if y'all were in the same test session, y'all would all have call signs within one letter of each other, if y'all tested at the same place at the same time. So.
and speaking of testing, for those new hams, the FCC has implemented a $35 fee for new hams. And also that $35 fee is for new hams, renewal of your license after 10 years, and if you want a vanity call sign, you have to pay that. They will send you a bill. And what I recommend, especially for the new hams, once you receive that bill in the email from the FCC, you have 10 days to pay it. But I recommend you pay it immediately with a credit card. Don't write them a check and put it in the mail, because you know how sometimes the mail gets lost. So immediately when you get that, credit card it and send it back to them. Then they'll send you another email with your call sign.
Yeah, because basically what they do, if you don't pay it within that 10 days, they just throw out all your information and you have to start all over again. So, any other questions, comments?
Something Randy mentioned earlier in his session about not logging VHF and UHF contacts. If they are simplex contacts, I log them.
Well,
If they are repeater contacts, I do not log them because the actual contact is not made with the person you're talking to. It's made to the repeater. And I just got through, we have a local guy that I haven't figured out a polite way to tell him to quit logging contacts with me every time we talk on the net on 2 meters. So I just cleared a half a dozen of his contacts out of my log because they're all repeater contacts. And I don't think W4MOE wants to send me a QSL card.
well, that's like, another thing that's good to get in the habit of logging though, is like if you ever decide to do like what's called contesting and everything like that, a lot of those, the special events and everything,
Yeah.
they have you submit a log for all the credit and everything.
Yeah.
So it's kind of good to be in the habit. But yeah, like Harry said, I don't log anything on the repeater, but I do log all my stuff for, I mentioned I do a lot of portable stuff, soda and POTA and such. I log everything for that.
Oh yeah. Well, and I've got one in my log that I'm wondering is D1DA.
Ooh.
That is the part of the Ukraine that Russia has claimed. And I looked at it and I thought, So I went to the ITU and they have not officially recognized that, but I guess nobody has complained. But every now and then I see them pop up. And then what's really interesting is I see real Ukrainian call signs from that same region.
Well, and what's funny is they, some of the call sign prefixes make sense. Like, F is France and IK is Italy, but then some of them are just really weird. Like VE is Canada.
Uh-huh.
There's no V or E in Canada, but
and VK is Australia.
yeah. So, and some of them make a little more sense. Like ZL is New Zealand. Okay, Zealand, ZL. But,
And TF is Iceland.
yeah.
So it's the randomness is rampant in the world, I guess, is the politically correct way of saying that.
And you don't see them very often, but there are a couple of countries that use a number at the very beginning of the call sign. And there's also some of them that use 2 numbers inside the call sign.
Yeah.
So like you'll see something like, E304, ZBY or something like that.
Well, I worked a station yesterday that was, I turn around looking in my log, but anyway, it ended in WARD, which is Stan. No, it's World Amateur Radio Day. It was a special call sign, and I think it was Portuguese. It was like a CT23 WARD. I mean, it's a weird, but it was.
What, and that brings me to a good point, actually, that you mentioned that. Another thing sometimes you'll hear here in the United States is what's called a special event call sign. This is a 1-by-1 call sign. So it's 1 letter, a number, and then another letter. It's either W something something or N something something or K something something. And what that is, you can apply, like if you've got a special event station, like say you're going to set up radios to commemorate, like there's one every year that commemorates the original 13 colonies in the United States here. They have 13 different stations. Each one of them has one of those call signs. They have one in each colony, one in North Carolina, one in, Virginia, and so on and so forth. And each one of them has that special event call sign. That's kind of like a good way to do a special event that's quick and easy to remember, as well as it's good for, just to draw attention to it because it is a unique call sign. And what you can do if you're going to participate in a special event like that is apply for one of those call signs for that window. You'll apply for it for that weekend or that week or that day or however long your event is, and they'll let you use it for that time, and then it goes back in the pool for somebody else to go get it. So, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Harry. That just reminded me.
That's good because there's a lot of weird stuff out there, and like I say, countries celebrate things and they issue these special call signs, and basically, if you're wondering, is it really legitimate, Google it. And if it shows up on QRZ, then it's probably legitimate. That one from the Ukraine, I've got one that I logged, and he actually confirmed it through EQSL.
Well, and
So,
one thing,
I don't know.
oh yeah, well, one thing too, if you every once in a while there will be a call sign or two that QRZ misses because some of the databases don't update quite as often. So what sometimes you can do is you can type in a call sign and it will say, could not find this call sign, but this looks like a call sign from Germany, or this looks like a call sign from Italy, or this looks like a call sign from, South Africa. And so that way you can know, kind of where it's from, even if it doesn't pop up immediately in the database.
Well, we've run over.
Time.
Oh gosh, yeah. So
Does that mean I'm up next week, Howard?
You're up next week, Harry.
Okay.
well, thanks everybody.
I'll put my bells and whistles on and be ready to go.
All right, very good.
Thank you, Zach.
Good night, everybody. Thank
See
you.
y'all next week.
Good night.
73.
Oh, let me transfer host back to you, Howard, here. I saw that.
Thank you.
There you go.
Thank
You're
you.
the host again.
Thank you. Hope y'all have a good evening.
Take care,
Have a good one.
everybody.
Since I have two W4 PHs up, I'll have to figure out which one is
I
host.
did the at yahoo.com one.
Okay.
So see y'all.
73, Zach. Good job.
73. Thanks.
You too, Randy.
Well, we'll see you in the morning.
Yep.
Take care.
Have a good one.